Presentation of To the Best of My Knowledge on WPSU is made possible in part by support from the Penn State Alumni Association, informing, involving, and inspiring Penn State alumni and students through its publications, programs, and events. On the web at alumni.psu.edu. And from the members of WPSU.
From the studios of Penn State Public Broadcasting, this is To the Best of My Knowledge. Good evening, I'm Graham Spanier. Tonight we'll talk about online privacy. We are only beginning to understand the impact of what we say and what others say about us on the web. It can be scary out there. Tonight we'll talk about protecting our privacy online. And you can join the conversation. Call us at 1-800-543-8242. You can also email your questions to response@psu.edu. And now let's meet our guests. Dr. Hung Hsu is an assistant professor of information sciences and technology at Penn State. She leads the Privacy Assurance Lab, an interdisciplinary research group working on projects related to understanding and assuring information privacy. Josh Blackman is a teaching fellow at the Penn State Dickinson School of Law and has published law review articles on information privacy law, constitutional law, property law, national security law, and civil rights law. Thank you both for being on our program tonight.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to a topic that is very interesting right now to a lot of people. So let's begin by asking you both to define a little bit about what people mean in terms of privacy on the web.
I think in academic literature, there are a lot of privacy definitions. And to me, or from what I do in my research work, I see privacy from two different perspectives. One is more from individual perspective. Is actually define individual capability to control their own information flow. While the second perspective is from organizational perspective, privacy has been viewed as a protection and prevention from those privacy problems resulting from information aggregation, information sharing, information distribution, and processing activities. So that's the two perspectives of privacy from my point of view.
What are the reasonable expectations that people should have for privacy on the web?
Well, unfortunately, and this goes to the definition of privacy, is there really isn't any privacy. Sun CEO of Microsystems, Scott McNealy, said once that you have no privacy, zero, get over it. And a couple years ago, Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, said, if there's something that you don't want people to know about you, maybe you shouldn't have done it in the first place. I think today there exists this presumption that anything you do in public or on the internet can and will be held against you. And this is really one of the difficulties in defining privacy, because there is no expectation of privacy on the web.
I think some people are confused about whether if something's on the web, it's truly there forever, or can it be removed, or does it ever disappear?
I mean, to some extent, user can remove some of the stuffs, but it's about, to what level. Sometimes, for example, if you try to delete an email message from your Gmail account, maybe from your screen you see that image was gone, but it turns out that at the server end, from the Google perspective, they may take about 60 days to remove that message from their server. So sometimes you see that deletion of the message from the user end, but to what extent that message and content has been completely removed from the server end, that remains an open question.
In fact, there are actually paid services, one of which is called Reputation.com. They were recently featured in the Times. They actually offer a paid service whereby you can actually pay someone to remove all instances of your name on the web. It's a very complicated service, and it's questionable of how well it works, but it's something that people are taking very seriously. Celebrities even hire these firms to try to maintain their public presences, to try to scrub off all negative publicity, and to try to increase all positive publicity.
What kind of practices do you two follow? Are you role models of excellent behavior when it comes to protecting your privacy?
Hardly. Oh, go ahead.
In terms of my practices, I think some of my practices are very simple, which I employed in a daily basis. For example, think twice before giving out any personal information. If I'm trying to sign up for certain, free websites, there is no reason that I have to share my residential address with these free services. Then I wouldn't share my residential addresses with these free registered services. And then second, I never really believe any emails claiming that they are the credit card companies or banking and try to do some data verification. And sometimes I pay attention to a lot of cues available on the web browsers. For example, if I want to submit certain sensitive privacy information online, I may pay attention to whether the internet collection was secure or encrypted at that moment. So the cues I would look for is the web URL, the web address lines, and it has to start it with HTTPS instead of HTTP. So these are some simple themes we can do. But in terms of practical guides regarding privacy privacy protection, it could be hours or hours of discussion.
And what is it about that extra S on the HTTP that tells you it's okay?
The S represents data would be encrypted when you submitted your information through this site. So that represents that it's a secure data transaction on that website.
And you can trust it? They can't just pretend that it has an S on the end?
Well, I think we can trust the HTTPS to some extent. And of course, the web browser also sends other signals. For example, for the Firefox browser, right before the HTTPS, there are a little colored areas which indicate the security encryption certificates. That's a clickable loan. So if you want to say whether this HTTPS is the real encryption or not, you can try to click on that color loan either in the green, blue color or green color, and you can see the security certificates, which means that their data encryption may be encrypted or certified by other third parties.
Josh, what kind of practices do you follow?
Not many, actually, and for a very important reason. Anything you do on the web, whether you take all precautions or not, can ultimately be leaked. One of the biggest problems nowadays is you have these massive data houses that store everyone's information, and not because of any action of your own, the information is just leaked. There was a group called Epsilon, which just last week leaked hundreds of thousands of email addresses. And these could people like Hung, who take all precautions in the world to secure their stuff, but because of some enterprising hacker, if you think about it, it's a lot easier to hack into one massive data store and get thousands of email addresses and try and just pick on myself or Hung. So honestly, I don't take that much precautions. If I'm submitting a credit card number, I make sure that little lock is there to indicate that's encrypted. But that's about it. If you're putting on the web, or if someone else puts your information on the web, or even if you do nothing but someone else puts your information about you on the web, it might as well be gone. I describe Google like an elephant. It never forgets. Once it's there, it's gone forever and it's out of your hands.
I was meeting with a group of students today, and this topic came up. And I said to the students, be careful when you're on Facebook or on similar sites, because you may be posting things there now that even if you remove them later, an employer at the time you're looking for a job might be able to see them and have access to them. Is that good advice I was giving, or are there some ways around that now?
Sage words. You can never eliminate stuff from social networking. It's gone. And now, I'm sure, as you know, colleges actually will look up a person's profile on Facebook or Twitter and see what is this person up to. I mean, if they're 18 years old and they picture them drinking alcohol, that might not be a very good thing for their college admission application. I tell this to kids all the time, be very careful what you put on Facebook, because you'll never get rid of it. Once it's there for good.
And law enforcement, I understand, increasingly is making use of social networking sites to check up on folks and discover who's connected to whom. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Actually, I can give a very Penn State example. In 2005, when I was a student here, we beat Ohio State. And after the game, everyone rushed the field.
Yeah.
And a bunch of students made a group called I Rushed the Field after the Ohio State game. And Penn State police went through this group and picked out all the people in this group, and they talked to them, and they compared it to the film footage from ESPN, and they actually made arrests based on this. So this is nothing new, and I'm glad Penn State's been using the very tool to go after people.
If you're just joining us, I'm Graham Spanier, president of Penn State, and this is To the Best of My Knowledge on WPSU, Penn State Public Broadcasting, and PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Our topic tonight is online privacy with Dr. Hung Shu, an assistant professor of information sciences and technology at Penn State, and Josh Blackman, a teaching fellow at the Penn State Dickinson School of Law. You can join the conversation. Call us at 1-800-543-8242 or email us at response@psu.edu. I've recently discovered, I didn't actually discover it on my own, a colleague I work with said there are a lot of people impersonating me on the web with Twitter and Facebook. They have sites to make them look like me, and they're sending out various messages, and they've checked with the services that say that if you look at them carefully, people should understand that it's satire, and therefore it's consistent with their policies and they can't remove them. Only if there was something more malicious than that would they intervene and knock them off of their service. What do you, is this pretty common?
Absolutely. For every celebrity you find on Twitter, for example, you find a fake celebrity. For example,
I haven't thought of myself as a celebrity exactly, but I understand what you mean.
You're a well-known person. For example, Charlie Sheen, who set a Guinness record for the most Twitter followers in 24 hours, I think he had 1 million followers within one day, actually has a parody account called Charlie with 2 E's, Sheen. And it's basically a guy who pretends to be Charlie Sheen, and for the most part, they're funny. And as long as it can be considered as parody, the First Amendment protects this as a form of expression. It would not be possible for Twitter or Facebook someone to toss off a fake Graham Spanier just because they're saying some things about you. But I can understand people find this very offensive and might even think their integrity and their pride and their dignity is being impugned by these people pretending to be them. But the Constitution protects those expressions.
Mm-hmm. So are there any laws about any of these things? At what point has our government decided that we merit being protected in some way, or is there just none, really?
Regarding the laws?
Well, I mean, the primary law, and I hate to do this, but is really the First Amendment to the Constitution.
You carry that with you, huh?
I keep one every suit jacket. Every privacy law and every privacy case that's ever come before the courts has to be balanced with our freedoms of interest, because for you to say, I don't want someone pretending to be Graham Spanier, is the same way as the government saying, you cannot speak. Whether you like it or not, someone's fake profile is actually a form of constitutionally protected speech. So whenever someone passes a law to try to restrict this communication, in essence, you're limiting their constitutional freedom to speak.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your laboratory in the College of Information Sciences and Technology, what aspects of this do you delve into?
We actually conducted research from kind of information perspective, people perspective, and technology perspective. We develop privacy-enhancing technologies to help people better protect their personal information. While from people perspective, we would view these security and privacy problems as a human-centered problems. Even we have perfect technologies, we might not have the perfect and 100% of the security. We still need to pay attention to for example, how users may better utilize and pay attention to those privacy-enhancing technologies, or how to better secure and safeguard their personal information. Mm-hmm. So we are kind of doing interdisciplinary research by considering the policies and user requirements, user mental model into the design of the technology.
Now, I've always thought of myself as an early adopter on some of these things, but I must say I was kind of a holdout on having an iPad. I just didn't think I needed. And then I started to spend some time with people who had one. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was pretty amazing what they were able to do. And so I finally have one now. But when I got it and I was setting it up with all the different possibilities, I kept getting asked a question. Do you want to share your location with Google or with one of the other applications? And my first reaction was absolutely not. And I said, no, no, no. But then when I was trying to find a map or get directions, I realized, well, if it doesn't know where I am, it's a lot more complicated to do it. I finally broke down and just changed it to yes, yes, yes. I want them to know where I am because it makes it very user-friendly if you do that. But what are the consequences of doing that? I suppose they know where I am and where I tend to be, and if I'm asking for, I don't know, a restaurant recommendation, maybe I'm going to get certain advertising around that concept?
Yes. In fact, the location tracking for the smartphones or other smart devices like iPad or iPod, they are having this embedded GPS functions so they can accurately locate your geolocation. And they also have Wi-Fi access, and these Wi-Fi connections could also accurately locate your current location. And by having these locations and a lot of third-party applications, for example, when you install a fun game into your iPad or iPad, when you play with it, these third-party game developers may secretly collect your geolocation information, together with other personal details such as your gender and your age when you disclose or when you fill in certain forms when you subscribe for those games. And they collected this data in order to track your behavior. For example, they can track the frequency you play that game. And they also share these richful data sets with third-party advertisement companies so that advertisement companies could better personalize their ads to you based on your current location and based on your context, based on what you are doing at that moment, at that location. So these are the privacy concerns in terms of location tracking. And there are some other interesting things. Recently, we also heard about people worry about these geotags through their mobile phones or those cameras they took from their smart devices. And these devices, when they took photos, they often attach a geotag which can accurately reflect your geolocation based on the longitude and latitude information. And when you uploaded these photos into the Facebook or Flickr, they actually contain that geotags with this information. And there are even applications developed to extract these geolocation from your photos and then share with your social networks or share with the public.
Okay, this is all making me very nervous, but I don't know, should I be?
Well, I think the more important issue, especially for people who voluntarily submit this kind of information, there are services like Foursquare and what they call check-in services, wherever people want to go somewhere, they want to say, okay, I've just checked into Penn State, or I've just checked into Beaver Stadium. And a lot of people actually find this as a way of being popular, because they say, I checked into this cool club. But what actually happens is, when you know where someone is, you know where they are not. And there's actually one service that actually scanned all these check-in services, and they said, well, this person's at a bar, that means he's not at home. And it would actually enable people like robbers and others to actually go to someone's house and say, well, this person's checked in across the street or somewhere else. I have free reign. And this is an interesting application where real world meets virtual world. And it's very controversial that people actually want to always indicate exactly where they are in the world and using these GPS functions like on your iPad.
Now, here's a question that's come in via email about passwords. I recently stumbled across an article that suggests a password of 3 easy-to-remember words, such as, "This is fun." It's suggesting that it's not only more practical, but also more secure than a random string of characters, numbers, and symbols that many organizations dictate. It's an interesting concept. I think there are automated services or people can automate attempts to hack in to computers with passwords, trying to discover someone's password. And would having 3 different words or a phrase change that?
Well, passwords are interesting in one sense because you have to remember them. And very frequently when a password has to have a special character, an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, 4 numbers, it's very difficult to remember. So what ends up happening is people write it down a sticky note, stick it in their drawer, and then someone wants a password, they just look in the drawer and find the sticky note. Conversely, if you use a password that's easy to remember, it might be easy to find out what it is through things like social engineering, which is trying to figure out what is a person like. You know, you figure out their wife's the wife's birthday, and you can figure out those numbers. Or even just a brute force, which is just basically guessing letter after letter after letter, and eventually you might guess it. As for the email from TV land, I'm not sure if that's the best strategy, but if perhaps there's a combination of letters and words and numbers that they can remember, that might be a better tact.
Mm-hmm. You agree with that?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think a password should be contain certain numbers of letters, should be less than at least 8 letters, combination of symbols and letters and numbers. And so that's a more safe way to set your passwords. That's not easy to guess.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's open up our phone lines and take a call now. Carrie is on the line from State College. Hello, Carrie.
Good evening. Good evening. My question is about cloud computing.
Well, I'm not hearing Carrie on the line. Okay, maybe Carrie will be able to
Speaking of
call
Kerry,
back in and get
actually,
connected.
speaking of Kerry, just actually last week, Senators Kerry and McCain just actually introduced something called the Privacy Bill of Rights, which is actually a proposed piece of federal legislation that would allow certain types of private information to actually be protected, and if a company or organization actually leaked that information, they would actually be subject to prosecution by the Federal Trade Commission. So this is perhaps, in response to your question before, one way in which the government is attempting to remedy this broad cloud of information, trying to help secure and protect people's rights to keep their information private.
Okay, let's try again. We'll see if we can get Carrie on the air this time. Hello, Carrie. Are you there with us?
Good evening. Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, go ahead.
My question is about cloud computing. I have found that that keeping my information in the cloud and being able to download it onto whatever device I happen to be working on is very convenient. But I start to worry about how secure that is and wonder how secure it is.
Okay, let's maybe begin with the definition of cloud computing, because not everyone's familiar with that concept.
Cloud computing can be easy. For example, the concept of cloud computing can refer to the services such as you share photos through Flickr, or you share simply a Word document through Google, and which means that you uploaded these contents to a cloud environment, and you can easily access these documents and share with others without downloading them or saving them to your computers.
So it's something beyond your physical computer. Your information is actually being stored somewhere else in a device that's shared by a lot of people and distant from your own particular computer.
Yes.
And I guess the question is, you know, if people can kind of wrap their arms around their own computer, their own hard drive, they might feel a greater sense of security because it's all right there. But if it's up in the cloud somewhere, if it's somebody else that has ownership of the place where it resides, is it less secure? Should we be worried about that?
I think this data privacy is a concern for the cloud computing environment, because a lot of cloud service providers, they actually share the data storage space, which means that multiple service providers may share the same space to store this data. So the question would be, do they have sufficient security measures for these places? And do they have access controls for those data stored in these spaces? And these are the widely privacy concerns because of the shared storage base for the cloud infrastructure.
And also by mere supply and demand, we mentioned this before, but it's a lot more valuable to hack into, say, Google's cloud than trying to hack into my personal PC. If you hack into my computer, there's not much available. But if you attack a cloud which has million people's stuff on it, that's a much more valuable target. And you'll see that hackers like to target these high-value targets, so to speak. So what I'd recommend to the caller is, if you do keep stuff in the cloud, always keep a backup copy. If for whatever reason Gmail or Google or Flickr or something else goes down, I think there was actually a case where Gmail lost the inboxes of a certain percentage of their members a few weeks ago, and people who had lost years of their emails gone into literally into the clouds. So it might be helpful to just keep a local copy of all your emails. You don't need to print it out, but just if you download an archive file, it's called a PST, just keep that local on your hard drive. And I think that will be an easy way to remedy your concerns. But definitely giving information out to the ether and letting it just go beyond it's a tricky story.
And it's wise for the users when they choose the cloud service providers. They probably want to read their terms of the services and also their privacy and security policy to make sure that they have their data stored at a secure place.
I must admit, sometimes I get these long messages, do you agree or disagree, do you accept or not accept the terms of the policy, and it could take you half an hour to read some of those things. I think most people just probably click onto them without reading all the rules.
I'm a lawyer, and I admit I don't even read them. There's no point, because if you think about it, say you disagree with the terms, will you write them a letter and ask them to change the terms? Will you try and negotiate the terms with them? It's what's called almost a click wrap, because you either agree to use it or you don't use it. So if you want to use the service, then you'll use it. If not, you won't.
You're basically just saying, yeah, I want it.
And privacy policy is kind of the rub, is they can be updated almost at any time without any notice. So even if there's something in there that might help you, 6 months down the road they can change your policy, and now it won't help you. So reading those is probably not an efficient use of your time.
1-800-543-8242 is our telephone number, or via email at response@psu.edu. And speaking of email, let's take another one here. Is there any way to own a smartphone while blocking your information, coordinates, internet activity, etc., from marketing and other companies? Or does this fall under the far-fetched dream of having your cake and eating it too?
Well, that's an interesting question, and that actually corresponding to a recent study conducted by Wall Street Journal. In the last December, Wall Street Journal investigated over 100 popular smartphone applications where users downloaded onto their smartphones, which they enjoy using very much. And out of these 100 popular smartphone applications, 50 of them actually collect their unique device ID, and they use this ID to track what users are using their application from their smartphones. And 47 of these applications actually share the geolocation data with other outsiders or advertising companies. And 5% of these 100 popular applications share other personal details like your age and gender and other demographic information with outsiders without users' awareness.
But why is it so valuable for someone to know where I am? There has to be a monetary value, because they're going to a lot of trouble to do this. Why do those 50 applications want to know where I am or which game I'm playing?
Well, the goal is really to build a profile of who you are, what you like to do, and most importantly, what you want to buy. If they know that you're frequenting expensive designer malls, or if you're frequenting auto shops, if you're frequenting sports games, they can tailor their marketing towards you. If they know that you're buying all these applications to help you follow sporting events, they can sell you sporting stuff. Whenever you go to Google, if you ever do a search, in the right-hand pane, there's actually a list of advertisements. And those aren't random advertisements. Those are actually geared towards something which Google, in their infinite wisdom, thinks that you will want to buy. And more often than not, they're actually right. All this information about what we do, what we buy, what games we play, who we frequent with, who our friends are, what groups we join, this all builds a profile. So you actually have almost like a Nielsen rating for yourself. What do you like to do? And they can use this to target you directly and actually make money off of you. And that's why, particularly, a lot of these apps are free. They don't charge you for these apps, but they're collecting information from you, and they'll use that to their monetary advantage.
So when the user click on those ads, and you could imagine that there will be a money sharing among different application developers at advertisement companies. So the higher level of the personalized ads would be targeted based on your location activities. The higher possibility for a user to click that ads.
So is it correct to assume that if I want to buy a pair of shoes, and I put down shoes, that the advertising that I will see come up might be a combination of just the fact that right then and there I'm asking about shoes, but also something about my history? They might want to know if the last time I looked I was following clicks through for a more expensive pair of shoes or a lesser expensive pair of shoes or a certain type of shoe.
Absolutely. Everything you do, if you buy it online, if you search for online, it's recorded, and they know it. If you've bought a lot of Nike shoes before and you search for sneakers, they're probably going to serve you ads for Nike because they know you like Nike shoes. The goal is to make it as easy as possible for you to buy their product, and that's what this profile that they're building about you accomplishes.
Good. Let's take a call from Rick, who's calling from State College. Good evening, Rick.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello?
Hello, you're on the air, Rick.
Good evening.
Good evening, Rick. Are you there? Okay, we'll get.
I can't hear you through the...
Okay, you need to listen to us
Hello?
just through the telephone, Rick, just through the telephone. Okay, we'll help Rick out with that when we get back to him. Are for-profit identity protection services worth the cost? With all of these things that we've just been talking about developing, I assume now there are companies who want to help you negotiate it and protect yourself.
I'll admit I'm actually friends with the co-founders of one of the largest ones, which is Reputation.com, formerly known as Reputation Defender. I haven't had any personal experiences with them. The Times did run a big profile on them about a month ago. I think what those services are probably best for is helping to do damage control and help to create positive spin. I don't know how effective they are by eliminating entries that are negative against you, because there's things like Google Cache and blogs, and sometimes you can't ask a person to take your stuff off their site. But as far as creating positive buzz, I think they're very helpful. And we'll see going forward how essential these tools are. I think it's actually a new wave of services trying to manage your digital identity the same way that celebrities might hire a PR agent or press relations. You know, you need to hire someone to manage your Google footprint.
I actually like the design rationales of these services, because these services are actually proactively watching any information released about you, and they may carefully monitor your credit report or any other information released about you. So I like this proactively privacy protection notion, but I haven't used these services myself, so I cannot tell the effectiveness of those services and what kind of data sources they can get and what kind of data monitoring activities they can do. But I did a search about these services. It seems that the cost of these services are not high, and they charge about $10 to $15 per month for average users.
Something free that your listeners can do is set a Google alert for your name. What that basically does is whenever someone anywhere on the internet types in your name on a blog post or a website, it sends you an email. So if you go to alerts.google.com, you just create an alert with your name, so Josh Blackman or whatever, and I get probably a couple dozen emails a day whenever someone uses my name. So what that allows you to do is damage control. So if someone uses your name in a manner that you don't particularly like, you can contact them and try and take it down before anyone finds out. I'll frequently find someone writing a blog post about me before they even tell me. It's actually pretty interesting, and I'd recommend anyone put a Google alert on your name. It will save you a lot of time.
I love that services. I actually use that for, I receive a lot of alerts, but for most of the time, it's alerting that what kind of other scholars citing my work.
Oh, good.
So it's a good, citation service.
We're going to try Rick again, who's back on the line, I understand. Hello, Rick.
Hello. I apologize. I simply couldn't hear you through the phone.
That's all right.
Earlier, when you were talking about giving out information and asking questions, you were oriented mostly towards commercial ventures. There's a company in California that operates under several names. They're the ones that run the ads in the middle of the night saying 6 people are looking for you and contact us. And, of course, they charge a fee and they'll connect you with the 6 people who are looking for you. Also, sometimes when you Google something, you get an offer from them under another name, it's Intellius, to buy the information. So as a joke, I bought the information about myself and found all sorts of inaccuracies there, because they get their information from what used to be called data mining. Especially, you would buy a microwave oven and you get this form asking you all sorts of little questions. Well, now they do the mining online. Don't they have a responsibility, if they're selling the information to whoever wants to purchase it, to be accurate? Because some of the information, I was taught to tell the truth, but now when I put down information, like the young lady was saying about address, I just make up ridiculous stuff so that it's always wrong.
Well, let's ask our experts about that.
Well, there's no legal obligation to be factually accurate in that sense. If someone manages to collect some information that's publicly available and happens to be inaccurate, perhaps you might ask them to fix it. But there's no affirmative obligation for them to fact check it themselves. That's one of the dangers of data mining. Data mining, for those in the audience who don't know, is the process of digging through vast amounts of information on the web and pulling out little bits and pieces about a person. So maybe your address is on one site, and maybe your phone number is on another, and maybe your age is on another, and it kind of assembles all together and makes a profile of you. I think that's what the gentleman's speaking about. Those pieces of information might be current, might be outdated. I think as a good business practice, they might want to allow people to update and correct information that's inaccurate, but legally there's no affirmative obligation for them to fix what you're talking about. And that's one of the dangers of the web, because if someone has an old, outdated piece of information, that can really harm your reputation, especially if it's no longer accurate or no longer projects an accurate picture of who you are.
If you're just joining us, I'm Graham Spanier, president of Penn State, and this is To the Best of My Knowledge on WPSU, Penn State Public Broadcasting, and PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Our topic tonight is online privacy with Dr. Hung Shu, an assistant professor of information sciences and technology at Penn State, and Josh Blackman, a teaching fellow at the Penn State Dickinson School of Law. You can join the conversation by calling us at 1-800-543-8242 or email us at response@psu.edu. Let's take our next caller now. Betty is calling from Lock Haven. Hello, Betty. You're on the air.
Thank you. I think perhaps the previous caller touched on my question, and perhaps the answer was already explained. But my question was, is there a way, since a lot of people, a lot of companies perhaps are tracking my activities as I work at my computer, for example, could I call up Google and say, okay, let me know what you have on me. I want to know all the information that you're storing about me.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think if you just Googled your own name, you might find a few or thousands of possible entries, and you would probably know what Google knows. Is that right? Or is there some other stuff out there that...
Well, Betty, one thing I mentioned before is you might want to create a Google alert on your name. And what that actually does is Google will actually send you an email every time someone uses Betty from Lock Haven. Someone puts that on a blog somewhere in the ether. Whenever someone types that in, you will get an instant email telling you that someone's written about you. If you go to alerts.google.com, that's actually quite easy. But generally, yes, if you just Google your name and include as much information about yourself, maybe where you live or where you work and different keywords, you can put together a pretty good profile of who you are. The information that you should be worried about is the stuff that's not on Google, the stuff that's in these vast data mining warehouses where some company somewhere has collected every piece of information about you since you were 15 years old, and where you've lived, where you work, what you do, what you eat, where you like to go on vacation, you know, what kind of clothes you wear. That's the kind of information that's in the cloud, and Google will not tell you about that. But as far as what's in the web, that's fairly easy for you to ascertain.
So you have your Google alert set for instantaneous.
Instant.
I have a once-a-day summary. How do you do it?
I have that whenever a person cite my name, or maybe you know the same name, Hung Shu,
Yes.
and I will get an email alerts and saying that which article or which source cite my name or quote my name, or my name appear in what kind of contents posted on Google.
I think Google allows you to set how often you want to hear from them. So it could be once a week, once a day, or instantaneously,
Absolutely.
I presume.
Yes.
I forgot
Absolutely.
that was an option.
The instant option's good.
Yeah, the instant option, when people cite your name or quote your name online, and they will instantly send you an email.
It's probably also a good idea to have some sort of credit monitoring system. If you pay, it's probably $30 or $40 a month to one of the credit bureaus, who will actually keep track of your credit score. And if someone actually unexpectedly opens a line of credit, or takes out a mortgage in your name, or opens a credit card, you'll know about it right away, versus you know about it in 3 months when you get the credit card statement that's overdue and someone put a Ferrari on your card. So it's probably best to do as much as you can to know instantly, because that way you can do damage control, and perhaps before the person runs away with identity theft, they could be caught in the act.
Let's take a call from Phil. Phil is on the line from St. Mary's. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for taking my call. My question is, quite often I get these pop-ups that would not let me go on to the program that I want to until I answer the questions or buy a product or ask that they postpone it for a later time. It's my computer. I bought and paid for it. And that, yes, I use the internet to get some service, but these people who are taking over my computer even for a few minutes didn't have anything to do with it. I'm just wondering what happened to my property right to use my personal property, my private property, the computer.
So I understand you're asking about pop-up ads that get in the way, and until you do something with it, it won't let you go to where you want to go.
I keep coming back every single time I turn the computer on until I happen to know something about how to disable it. But what gives them the right to do that?
I bet Dr. Shu's got a solution in mind for that.
I think some of those pop-up, maybe the ads, and they pop up the ads and then attract your attention and force you that to pay attention to those ads. That could be one possibility. And other possibility could be due to the fact that your computer may be affected by spyware or other viruses, and then that's why you are kind of having these pop-up windows keep popping up and require your attention or action toward that, so that they can collect your clickstream data out of these programs.
Now, I have my computer set up. There's a setting for, I don't want pop-ups. Now, I still occasionally get them, but not as if I would if I hadn't clicked that setting. So that kind of leads to the question about, and we have one here via email, about what is the most secure browser?
Chrome.
It's an open-ended debate. I think for the current browsers, all of these browsers are trying to push in the initiative do not track feature, which means that when users enable these do not track features from your browsers, and the browser will send a signal about do not track this particular user for sites a user try to visit. But it's a very new initiative, and a lot of browser developers are still working on this. And currently, some browsers offering some versions of the do not track feature, but the usability is not that high. For example, for IE browser, the most advanced version of IE browser, they offer this do not track feature, but they require users to download and add a list of the tracking sites they want to block from. So imagine that for average user, where their awareness of these trackings, and then the awareness of getting knowledge and getting these sites are low, and it's hard for them to configure their own browsers.
You mentioned Chrome. What is that?
Chrome is Google's browser. Are you still on the phone, sir?
No,
I would recommend, if you're really concerned about these pop-ups, using Google Chrome. There's something called incognito mode, which is kind of a way of being like this stealth surfer on the web, where you can basically just block all tracking, block all cookies, block everything. If you download Google Chrome and you go new incognito window, it's very simple, and that will probably get rid of a lot of the garbage that you don't want. Going back to your question, unfortunately, your right to private property in your computer ends the second you plug an Ethernet cable in there or connect to the internet, because you've now just opened yourself to the entire World Wide Web. So it's to the extent that you can use a browser like Chrome, or perhaps what Dr. Shu mentioned, Internet Explorer, the most recent version, there are different ways. As far as the pop-ups, you probably have some spyware. You should probably get Zone Alarm or a program like that that can eradicate the spyware, because what it actually means is someone's actually using your computer as if it was a zombie and just using it to pop up all these ads, and you have no control over it. So try to get that cleaned up, and maybe you'll get your property back somewhat.
Someone in an email is asking about beacons. What are beacons? And should we be concerned? How can we avoid them?
Beacon is like, sometimes we call them web bugs. They are attached to some small image files, and then they are placed on different web pages we are visiting, and often they are also a tracking feature the websites try to place, and these beacons can track our online behaviors, just like cookie track us. When they place these beacons on our computers, they can track what kind of sites we click on, and for that particular site, which section of the sites we click on. And some of those powerful tracking files could even track what we type in from our keyboards. So all these powerful tools are created to track our online behaviors and create our online profiles in order to send us the personalized advertisement to us.
What about national security issues? That's been a hot topic. The Patriot Act, people wondered what level of privacy they had. Could you talk about that?
Sure. One interesting aspect of the Privacy Bill of Rights that we mentioned before is that it exempts all government actors. It's all these laws and regulations to try to make it harder for private companies to protect their data and not release it. Yet at the very same time, the police, the CIA, the FBI, all law enforcement is basically exempt from it. So I think there's definitely been this disconnect between what people see as the role of the private sector to help guard information and the role of the public sector. Whenever someone can make the explanation of, well, there's a national security purpose, it's almost as if it's like, okay, all right, whatever, privacy, whatever. But there's definitely a compelling argument to be made that one of the biggest threats to civil liberties is actually from the state. Especially when you have, if we look at the WikiLeaks scandal that happened over the summer, we actually had the United States government putting pressure on companies like PayPal and others to try to get information from them. So even if the United States doesn't need to use a search warrant or something else of that nature, they can still get it from these private groups. So there's a very wishy-washy interplay between private sector and public sector in exchanging personal information, even notwithstanding this little document right here.
Now, I think people understand, and we've talked about it a little bit, if you're doing a Google search, you're going to see some advertising, and people understand that's a trade-off, that you're getting the Google service and you're going to have to look at the advertising. But internet service providers, that's a little different. You're paying a monthly fee for someone to get you connected and to allow you to use the internet. Do internet service providers engage in some of this commercial activity or monitoring, or is there kind of a firewall between those different uses?
Probably not. The important thing to stress is we don't know for sure exactly who's collecting what information because we don't know. But if I had to guess, if you have a company like Verizon or perhaps Comcast, and they're monitoring thousands of customers and millions of customers across the United States, and what websites they go to, and what products they buy, and what apps they download, and all these other factors, I think it'd probably be a safe assumption that they share this data in some form, perhaps not identified to you as an individual user, but perhaps in the aggregate. They can say 100,000 people in State College downloaded this program, or these people in New York City watched this show. And this is everything to kind of build together this profile, which is really driven by capitalism, to figure out who a person is, what they want to buy, and how can we sell more of it.
We talked a little bit about the economic side of why people would want to collect information and track where you are and so on. But are there criminals out there who can somehow make use of where we are by tracking our cell phones or looking at searches? Is there bad stuff that bad people can be up to that we should be keeping in mind, apart from those who just want to make money off of us in a legitimate way?
Definitely, there are cases like this. For example, back to the smartphone scenario, if we are taking a photo for one of the very expensive jewelry we purchased recently, and we share that beautiful photo through Flickr, and the bad people, when they saw that piece of photo, they can extract the geotag out of that photo, and then the geotag containing accurate geolocation, including longitude and latitude, so they can accurately, locate where that piece of jewelry would be. So that become their targets. And for some other examples, those geotags could review our current location. So there might be bad people out there who are actively collecting this data and comparing, these geotags with our residential address. And when they detect that we are away from home, and then our house could be the target of these bad people.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond the mere physical harm, there's also the threat to reputation. It's very easy to find something on Facebook or Twitter or elsewhere to blackmail or extort a person. Say if a person checked into a nightclub and there's a picture of him hanging out with some other girl, you can blackmail the person saying, I will show this picture to your wife unless you give me X. There are just many ways to take the information which people think is private and use it against them. Even worse, say the person who's philandering and stepping out on his lady isn't the one who uploaded the picture. Say someone else did, and he got snagged in a photo. you can then use that against him. Or even more egregious, you have something like Google Street View, which is where Google effectively equips cars with these 360-degree cameras that basically film everything and everywhere, driving up and down the streets of every city they've been to State College. When this was first released, someone was actually photographed smoking, and his wife thought he had quit smoking, and he was in the doghouse for that. Subsequently, Google's actually started to blur the photographs, but this threat to reputation is still very strong.
Even with a blurred photograph, the wife might.
Well, what would actually happen? There was actually a case even after the faces were blurred. There was this one case where a wife recognized the car. There was some distinctive dent on it, or some sort of distinctive crash had happened, and they can actually determine that was my husband. He was there. He shouldn't have been there. He's in trouble.
Now, Frank is writing in here. We've been talking as if being monitored, so to speak, on the web with our buying behaviors or our use of internet sites is a negative thing. But he's saying, you know, what are the possible harms of having your behavior tracked? Why not let people know you are interested in buying shoes? You might say, well, there's a good side to this analysis that's going on because you're searching, you're doing a search on a search engine, and the engine is helping to steer you to something that you might genuinely be interested to. Nobody's forcing you to buy the shoe or necessarily even to click on to a particular site.
Well, I think the threat is they know you bought something that you might not want them to buy. I'll give you a positive example. Say a boyfriend is very eager to buy his girlfriend an engagement ring, and he buys it for online, and then she's using the computer and she sees, he bought me a ring, and it ruins a surprise. This actually happens. Let's think of a bad example. Say someone has, some really embarrassing disease and needs to buy, I don't know, let's say Viagra online, and then someone finds out, well, this person needs Viagra. That might not be something you want to know. That might not be something you want people to know about you. So it cuts both ways. Sometimes people buy stuff they don't want anyone to know. They want to be able to walk into a dark alley and buy something in private. And this tracking, there's this omnivalence, this perpetual surveillance, it vitiates that and weakens it. And it's just not something which people can have going forward in the way which people are expected to have.
Clearly trade-offs. Jim from Mifflinburg, let's squeeze in a call from you here as we wind down our discussion tonight. Good evening, Jim.
Well, thank you for taking my call. I was just wondering if people are actually prosecuted for creating these viruses that jam up your computers or used to, and I spent a lot of money for a computer for my daughter to go to school, and it was jammed up, it locked and wouldn't work anymore. I was just wondering if people would actually after these people and.
Well, I assume that they're hard to catch, but if you can catch them, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right in the head. Locating the authors of viruses is near impossible. They're mostly located in third world countries where they don't have interesting ways of tracking them. Even if they track them, it's very hard to prove who did what and how it was transmitted. The Internet's kind of just a wild, wild west, so to speak, of information privacy law. It's really hard to figure out who's who and what's what. And the best you can do is take steps like Dr. Shu and I mentioned, protecting yourself, being reactive, being proactive, and just making sure you don't get in trouble.
I think people tend to feel that a phone call, an actual voice phone call, is pretty secure these days, and that email is not very secure. But what about text messages? Is that somewhere in between, or is that more like one or the other in terms of the protection for privacy that you get?
In terms of privacy and security, I would say that there is no perfect security or there is no absolute privacy assurance. For text messages, there are still possible ways to hack through the transition of these text messages. And for service providers such as AT&T and other service providers, they have to store these text messages on their server for example, 72 hours as a usual business practice. And then these text messages could be also stored on your devices. These messages could be also hacked through during the process of transmitting. So I think there are still security threats, and I would say no perfect security.
Sometimes if I purchase something and they have my credit card already, they'll show the last 4 digits, and obviously they've kept my credit card information. and other times I have to start all over as if they never heard of me before. So I assume that both things are out there, and different retailers, different companies use both of them depending on their own practices.
Be careful.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I feel like we've only scratched the surface, and I know we've got Kelly still on the line. I don't think we're going to be able to get to Kelly, but I do thank you both very much for participating in this discussion tonight. I want to thank our guest tonight, Dr. Hung Shu, an assistant professor of information sciences and technology at Penn State, and Josh Blackman, a teaching fellow at the Penn State Dickinson School of Law. And I'd like to thank you for watching our program tonight. Tonight's program will be stored in an electronic archive that can be accessed through WPSU.org. This site also links to online resources on tonight's topic. To the Best of My Knowledge is a production of Penn State Public Broadcasting. For all of us here at WPSU, I'm Graham Spanier. Thank you for joining us, and have a good night.
Presentation of To the Best of My Knowledge on WPSU is made possible in part by support from the Penn State Alumni Association, informing, involving, and inspiring Penn State alumni and students through its publications, programs, and events.